Today's lesson is Mr. and Mrs. Madison. For this lesson, you're going to need to know a few words. The first word is citizen. A citizen is a legal resident of a country with rights of that country. For example, Joey's uncle became a citizen of the United States. The next word is govern. Govern means to rule over or be responsible for the best interests of a nation. Example, as the President of the United States, George Washington was chosen to help govern the nation. Next word is looming. Looming is an event that one may not like but seems to be likely to happen. For example, dark clouds meant that the thunderstorm was looming. Your next word is magnificent. Magnificent means very great, beautiful, or impressive. And your last word is topics. Topics are key subjects of a discussion, paper, or project. For example, the teacher explained that the read aloud topics were seasons, and weather, and astronomy. One thing about this story to keep in mind is that this is a story being told to two young kids your age. Listen carefully to today's read aloud to learn more about James Madison. In addition, listen carefully to find out what led to the eventual beginning of the war. It was a beautiful spring day in Virginia. 10-year-old JP and his younger sister Adele raced from their home through the pasture or field that led to their grandfather's farmhouse. Though originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, their grandfather Lafayette now lived in the neighboring horse farm. Grandfather Lafayette loved to tell his children stories. Today he had promised to tell them all about the War of 1812. JP was learning about this war in school, and of course Adele wanted to know everything about anything that her brother was doing. Before he retired, their grandfather had been a history professor. He declared that he was an expert on the subject. Grandfather Lafitte was waiting for the children on the front porch as JP and Adele settled into the chairs at the table across from their grandfather. Adele noticed that he was holding an old leather-bound journal. "What do you have there?" asked Adele inquisitively. She had just turned 8, and JP said that she was always full of questions. "Oh, this is my journal. It belonged to your great-great-great-great-grandfather. He fought in the War of 1812. I'll tell you more about him later," Grandfather Lafitte explained. "Now, where should I begin?" he asked eagerly. "I have a list of topics that I need to learn about," started JP. He has to know about President James Madison and his wife Dolly," Adele interrupted excitedly. "Yes," said JP, finishing what he was saying. "I have to know about the beginning of the war, the USS Constitution, the attacks on Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Andrew Jackson, and the Battle of New Orleans, and how the war ended." "Well, that's quite a list," exclaimed Grandfather Lafitte. "We'd better get started then. It sounds like you do not need to know anything about pirates," he added with a curious tone. "Pirates?" gasped JP. "Were there pirates in the War of 1812? "We shall see," chuckled Grandfather Lafitte. "I think I will start at the beginning and tell you about the man who was president when the war began." "James Madison?" said Adele proudly. She had recently attended a school field trip to Montpelier because it was close to their home, and she learned a lot about James Madison. Grandfather Lafitte began. James Madison was born on March 16th, 1751. He grew up on a large plantation in central Virginia, not far from where we are right now. His family home was called Montpelier. As a young boy, Jimmy, as his father called him, was homeschooled or taught at home. It's because it's been said that he read every book that his father had in his library, and Mr. Madison had a lot of books. When he was 17, James went to the College of New Jersey, which was now called Princeton University. Just as he did when he was young, James Madison loved to read. He enjoyed learning Latin and Greek and debate in college. He had actually graduated from college in only 2 years. I like learning Spanish in school, Adele added enthusiastically. I'm glad that you do, replied Grandfather Lafitte, smiling at his granddaughter. He continued, as a young man, James Madison did not like the way colonies were run by Britain. He thought the colonists should be able to govern themselves. In 1774, when he was just 23 years old, James Madison became a leader of the House of Burgesses. The next year, the colonies were at war with Great Britain. This war was the Revolutionary War. It lasted until 1783. Americans won their freedom and they became citizens of a new nation, the United States of America. Didn't James Madison write the Constitution? Asked J.P. You're right, replied Grandfather. After the war, he continued to be involved in governing Virginia. He is perhaps the most famous for his role in helping to write the Constitution, though James Madison was the one that had the idea to use each state's population as a way of deciding how many elected representatives it should have in Congress. He was also responsible for organizing the government into 3 branches by different powers. In fact, much of the Constitution was written by James Madison. But he did get some help from George Washington and many of the founding fathers. James Madison also helped write another part of the Constitution called the Bill of Rights. When are you going to tell us about Dolly Madison? Asked Adele. Mama says that she is a really interesting lady. Yes, she is, replied Grandfather Lafitte. That's coming next. Don't you worry. People who knew him said that James Madison was a shy and serious man. He also had some health problems. His poor health and his involvement in politics, he was a busy man, meant that he did not spend much time socializing. However, in 1793, when he was 42, James Madison met a young woman named Dolly Payne Todd. Dolly Todd was 25 when she met James Madison. She previously had been married to a man named John Todd. She and her husband, John, had 2 sons, John Payne and William. Sadly, Dolly's first husband and her youngest son, William, both died from yellow fever. Dolly, who was known to be very cheerful and outgoing, turned to her friends and family for support. Her friends introduced her to James Madison. When they met, James Madison was a member of the House of Representatives. They liked each other and began to spend more and more time together. They got married in September of 1794. Where did they live after they got married? Asked Adele. Well, at first they lived in James Madison's family home, Montpelier, not too far from here. However, in 1801, when his close friend Thomas Jefferson became president, the Madisons moved to the new capital. Washington, D.C.? Exclaimed Adele. Exactly, replied Grandfather Lafitte. James Madison became Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State. That meant that he was responsible for dealing with other countries on behalf of the United States. Almost immediately, he had problems with Great Britain and France. What kind of problems, Grandfather? Asked Adele. Both countries were interfering with the U.S. merchant ships. Why were they doing that? Asked J.P., who by now had finished an entire ham sandwich. You see, a series of wars had broken out in Europe. These wars were named after the man who started them. their well-known French military leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon wanted France to become the most powerful nation in the world, but Great Britain and the other nations wanted to stop him. Britain had one problem, though. Although it had a powerful navy, it did not have enough sailors. To get more sailors, they captured men and forced them to join their navy. In the beginning, they only captured men from their own country, but as the Napoleonic Wars continued, they began to stop American ships and capture members of their crew too. That must not have made James Madison very happy, said Adele. It didn't, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't convince the British to stop. After being president for 2 terms, Thomas Jefferson suggested that his friend James Madison run for president. In March of 1809, James Madison became the 4th president of the United States. And Dolly Madison became the First Lady. She did, indeed, replied Grandfather Lafitte. Dolly Madison was actually the first First Lady. She was an excellent hostess. She had magnificent parties, and she was known for her love of fashion and had quite a few fine dresses. She even helped to design the interior of the new president's house, which we now know as the White House. By the time James Madison came into office, war was looming. Many members of Congress were urging him to declare war on Great Britain. They thought the British had been arming Native Americans and were encouraging them to fight American settlers moving west. James Madison felt that he had no other option but to lead his nation into war. On June 18th of 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. And you'll have to listen to the next episode to find out what happens next.